Andrew Jackson was considered a man of the people. However, it is said that he was a sectionalist, which contradicts being a man of the people. The definition of sectionalism is the excessive or narrow-minded concern for local or regional interests, as opposed to the interests of the whole. An example of this is how the US, in general, a lot of the tariffs benefited the northern economies over the southern economy. Jackson owned a small plantation in Nashville, Tennessee called the Hermitage. Although he started with a small amount of slaves, this grew along the plantation's size. Jackson had a cotton plantation and exported his commodity. Though this was common in high Southern society and accepted in the Southern society in general, some other states, especially in the North, were against it, and abolitionists had started to become more popular in the North. This is why Jackson never spoke out against slavery, because of his ownership of them, but also put the benefit of slave-owning Americans over abolitionists. This came about during the nullification crisis. South Carolina were against having taxes going to federal funds. They wanted to have more states' rights and to be able to nullify any law they felt was unconstitutional. Despite Jackson being a believer in states' rights, he had decided against South Carolina, which shows Jackson considering America's interests over South Carolina's. Abolitionists at this time started sending anti-slave propaganda to the South. Jackson was firmly against this and created the Gag Rule, which ceased abolitionist petitions to the Congress. This can be seen as Jackson's sectionalism, siding with the slave owners as he is part of that collective. He also viewed slaves as inferior to white Americans. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act called for the removal of resisting Southern Native American tribes from their homelands. The tribes maintained resistance, and in 1831 and 1832 the Cherokees went to the courts. And in 1832 the decision it was ruled that the Cherokees had their own land, and they don't need to follow the Georgia law in their own territory. Jackson ignored the ruling and went and sent a force to prevent Southerners from forcing Indians westward anyway. During the 1830s, thousands of Native Americans were forced to march along the infamous Trail of Tears. Jackson believed that Native Americans were inferior to white Americans, similar. Some Native Americans tried to westernize by having town halls and conducting themselves like other Americans. However, this was not good enough for Jackson, who didn't view them as equal to Americans. This is an example of Jackson's sectionalism, as he only considered the benefits of white Americans and not of the Native Americans. It can also be said that because of the courts ruled in favor over the Cherokees and not with Georgia, it also shows Jackson taking interest of Georgia law over federal, which is not benefiting most of Americans. These events show Jackson's sectionalism to an extent. The Gag Rule could be seen as Jackson trying to stop friction between abolitionists and slave owners. However, siding with the slave owners and being one himself does reflect sectionalism.
Andrew Jackson was seen to many as a hero, but some in Washington thought he was attempting to establish a dictatorship and subsequently called him King Andrew I. To understand why they accused him of this, you must first have to understand the political environment of the time. Jackson was the first president to attempt to control the legislative branch of government. This was done by using the presidential veto for political purposes, as well as by pressuring other politicians into supporting his bills and firing cabinet officials that didn't agree with him. This was first seen when he fired William John Duane during the Bank War and replaced him with Attorney General Roger Taney. In fact, Jackson's attempts to hire and fire government officials when he wanted led to the first use of the censure resolution in American political history. However, Jackson did also attempt to reform the system by introducing the spoils system, which meant that a winning party would be able to give its voters /supporters /members jobs in government. This is because before Jackson was elected, many of the officials in government had been there since Washington's presidency, and Jackson saw this as blatant corruption and removed them from office as soon as he was elected, and quietly replaced them with his own supporters.